Good afternoon. I'm Brian Keene, and welcome back to Secret Histories, a series where we make these shaky cam bootleg videos on my iPhone and we talk about my books in the order that they were written and published. Right now, we're looking at some original artwork up here on the wall. Now, I know you're saying, oh my God, is that the cover to the Deadite Press edition of Jack's Magic Beans? Is that the original artwork? It is. It is. That is my pal Nolan Gould on the set of Ghoul, and that is Jeff Cooper, Mikey Height, Mike Oliveri, and myself, an OG microphone from, of course, the Horror Show with Brian Keene. But really what we're looking at here is these three pieces by artist Russell Dickerson. They are from my novella Scratch. They are from the Cemetery Dance edition. That is set in modern times, depicting the events in the book. The book references rumors of Scratch going all the way back to the Civil War, and those are two pictures of that. Why are we looking at that? Well, because today we are going to talk about Scratch. I believe we mentioned in our last episode, in which we talked about the cage, that I was racing to get things done deadline-wise. As you know, I had gone through a pretty bad case of writer's block. Castaways and Urban Gothic had broken that loose, but mostly Castaways had broken it loose. But I was racing now to get things done. I wrote The Cage and Scratch and The Girl on the Glider pretty much simultaneously. I'm bringing that up for a couple reasons. One of them is the similarities between Scratch and The Girl on the Glider. The Girl on the Glider is metafiction, in which I appear as a character. Our home appears as a character, but it is fictionalized to a degree. Scratch is purely fiction, and yet the characters are based on myself and my family, and the home was indeed the home we live in. If you read the description of the home in this, and then you read the description of our home in Girl in the Glider, it's the same fucking house. This fictionalized character in this book, he's sort of a cross between myself and my pal Mike Hawthorne, who is local. He lives here in Central PA, as I do. Mike is a very accomplished comic book artist, a dear friend, and he and I had been talking about, nobody ever uses comic book artists as protagonists in their fiction, other than, Stephen King had used an artist in The Mist, and I said, well, maybe I'll do that, and so I did with Scratch. The idea for the cryptid itself, the giant snake, believe it or not, giant snakes are a very popular form of folklore, of cryptozoology, of legend, whatever you want to call it, going back to the indigenous peoples. There were a number of indigenous groups here in central Pennsylvania who had legends and tales of giant serpents. The first European settlers to come here had tales of them. Some of the more prominent ones was an aquatic one at Lake Raystown in Raystown, Pennsylvania, called Ray. Another very prominent one, and one that I've been studying since I was a kid, was Devil, which was supposedly a massive black serpent in and around the farmlands of Gettysburg. In fact, if you've ever been to Devil's Den in Gettysburg, you may think that, boulder-strewn wasteland of pits and canyons and peaks, got the name Devil's Den because of the Civil War. In fact, it did not. It had that name before the Civil War because the settlers who farmed it told tales of a giant serpent that lived in that area called the devil. And indeed, if you go back in the historical record, the indigenous folks in that area also had tales and sightings of a giant serpent. So all that was percolating in my head when I wrote Scratch. The flood itself that takes place in the book happened in real life. I pretty much didn't have any trouble thinking up a way to describe it. I just stood outside with my Moleskine and jotted down observations as the stormwater went by, and that was easy enough. Yeah, it was a fun book to write. It was one of the few things I've written that's actually scared me, because I am terrified of snakes. I have a genuine phobia of snakes. It doesn't matter if they're venomous or not. It doesn't matter if they're tiny little garter snakes or giant pythons. I do not like snakes. So this one gave me the absolute willies to write. I freaked myself out with this book, particularly when our protagonist and his neighbor make it across the creek to the neighbor's house and confront the snake. Oh man, I creeped myself out writing that, which is, fun. It's fun if you can do that. In writing this, we should think about what's going on in my personal life at the time. As I told you before, it's the Great Recession. My finances are really starting to crumble. My marriage is also really starting to crumble. It's depicted as this happy marriage in this book. And I suppose it is wish fulfillment in this book. How I wanted things to be. And as I said, at the time I'm working on this, I'm also working on The Girl in the Glider, which was a conscious effort to try to save my marriage. And we will talk about that more in detail when we get to The Girl in the Glider. It's only 2 books away. But first we have to talk about Clickers 3. And before we talk about Clickers 3, we have to finish talking about Scratch. Not a lot else to say about Scratch. It's never gotten a foreign translation. But this is what the hardcover looks like. Gorgeous, gorgeous end papers. Of course, by Russell Dickerson. We just looked at that original art up there on the wall. This is the SIG sheet, which I always thought was very cool. It always gives me the willies. The snake coming up behind him. This is the lettered edition. Doesn't look much different than the limited edition, other than it comes in the tray case and the end papers are a different color. Cemetery Dance, and then later on, when I got the rights back, I brought it out through Manhattan on Mars as a Kindle Nook Apple Kobo edition. I may do a little paperback at some point like I did for Alone. Not quite there yet, though. There's other stuff of mine that I want to get back in print and get out into paperback before I do this one. But it is collected in several different short story collections. And these are fairly easy to find on the secondary market. I see them on eBay quite often, and quite frankly, they're not that expensive. So if you really want it in this format, they should be fairly easy to track down. Okay, up next, Clickers 3, which presents the ending of a lot of things. And definitely a seismic moment in not only my career, but, well, let's just say that when Clickers 3 came out, everything changed for everybody. All right, and we'll talk about that more next time. Peace. I appreciate you.